we had cases with, remember those funeral homes in Detroit? They were stuffing people's dead bodies up in the attic and stuff.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And they were like finding these people who couldn't bury their loved ones. Welcome to Cases Gone Wild, brought to you by Marco Law. I'm your host, John Marco. I've been practicing for about 20 years, and in my career, I have seen and heard some of the craziest cases in the entire legal community. And we're here today to talk about some of those cases gone wild. Each show, I bring on a different attorney to talk about some of their experiences and talk about these cases gone wild. If you like my podcast, please make sure that you subscribe, leave us a review, give us some feedback. Please, this is how we grow and get to more people. On today's episode, I'm really excited today. We have my friend, colleague, and awesome medical malpractice attorney, Mickey McCullough. Mickey McCullough is at Summers Schwartz, which is a very reputable law firm. He used to work for Brian McKean, which is the most well-known and prominent, I would say, medical malpractice firm in Michigan. I think they do more medical malpractice than anybody out there. And Mickey worked there for several years. He was a clerk, and he graduated from Wayne State and Wayne State undergrad, and then Wayne State Law School in 2017. He's been doing medical malpractice ever since. Don't worry, even if you're not a medical malpractice attorney, I promise today is going to be some of the craziest cases you've ever heard. And I get excited when I was preparing Mickey, and I said, what are your ideas on some cases? And you told me, I can't wait to tell our guest today. So thank you for coming on. Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, of course, John. Thanks for having me on. Definitely a great honor. I am a partner of Summers Schwartz. I do almost exclusively medical malpractice. We'll handle, some other cases here and there, depending on what comes across my table. Some auto, some civil rights, even though, and I try sending those to you.
Yeah, give me those, man. I gave you the med mal, you give me those.
Yeah, but, we're pretty busy at Summers Schwartz. I believe, if we're not the largest, we're one of the largest medical malpractice firms in Michigan. We handle cases not only in Michigan, we have cases in Illinois.
Right.
We have some birth trauma cases down in Georgia that we're working on right now. A New York case. So we handle cases all over, wherever they come from. I get calls from attorneys both inside and outside of Michigan.
Yeah, great firm, and I know you're a great lawyer. I've trusted you to help with some of my clients who had medical malpractice issues in the past. So thanks for coming on the show, man.
Of course.
So, dude, you got to tell us about this case on Cases Gone Wild, because I don't want to say it is the craziest case, but it might be the craziest case.
Yeah, John, it is a pretty crazy case. So my firm handled this birth trauma case that will probably shock you and shock the audience.
So when we talk about birth trauma and medical malpractice, so you're representing injured people who were injured by healthcare professionals, like doctors, nursing homes, things like that, right?
Yeah, and specifically we're talking about the baby. Right, the unborn baby. So in this case, there was a black couple, which will be relevant later. You know why I'm telling you.
Sure.
Who were excited to have, a child. And they go into the hospital and, John, as you know, with your kids and, the audience listening who had a child, it can be pretty stressful being at the hospital during the time, but very exciting, right? And it can be very long. Labor can go on for a day, 24 hours. It's different
all the time, right?
Yeah, sure is.
Is this Detroit area hospital?
It's in Michigan.
Okay.
It's in Michigan. And the couple's excited. And during, the labor and delivery, one thing they're doing is they're tracking the, fetal heart traces. They're tracking,
that's
the
like
heartbeats.
The little thing, right? Like on the monitor, you can see that make sure the heart's beating of the baby so there's not any problems.
Exactly. So there's one monitoring the mom's heart rate, and then there's another monitor monitoring the baby's heart rate.
Sure.
And they're making sure the baby's doing well, right? And there can be accelerations, decelerations that they're looking for that cues them in to whether the baby's doing good, the baby needs to come out or the baby needs to come out immediately.
It's like a status monitor, right?
Yeah,
for the baby.
certainly.
Yeah.
And it starts out on the abdomen of the mom, and then as the pregnancy or the labor progresses, there's actually little nodes or nodules, almost like a thumbtack, that they put into the mother, and it actually goes onto the head of the baby. It's actually pretty remarkable, and that gives a better reading compared to the monitoring that's done on the abdomen.
Sure.
All right. So in this case, they were monitoring the tracings, and there were some pretty concerning tracings that came up.
So what does that mean concerning, like, there's a problem with the heartbeat, or there's babies in distress or something?
The baby's in distress. There can be a lot of reasons for it.
Sure.
Okay. And it's pretty complex, but at some point, the doctors made a decision. This baby needs to come out, right? Emergency C-section. And during that time, father, dad, get out of the room. Let's bring the team in, and we're going to get this baby out.
Scary thing for any parent.
Very scary. Having a C-section be scheduled is typically pretty scary. But when it needs to be an emergency C-section, of course, there's added fear because there's a lot of uncertainty involved, right?
Sure. So
now,
they make the dad leave the room, and they start operating on the mom?
Exactly. And they get the child out, okay? But unfortunately, the child's not doing good. The child's not breathing, and after around a half hour of resuscitation, they pronounce this child dead.
That's like every parent's worst nightmare. But what happens next, really?
Yes. This will really shock you next. Now, it's shocking enough, of course, being told that your child has died, right? I mean, I can imagine the emotion that flooded through the mom and the dad, right? But around 2 hours later, and this baby's brought down to the hospital morgue, the dad wanted to see the child.
Like, wanted to say, like, goodbye and, like last respects, right?
Absolutely, right? So he asked, and I don't recall if it was a nurse or doctor or another staff member, but somebody brought him down to the morgue.
And so the dad hasn't even seen his dead child yet at this point?
Correct.
So he wants to go. This is the first time. And they have like a morgue in the basement of hospitals?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, every hospital has a morgue.
Not a good journey down there, I'm sure. I mean, geez, oh, peace.
No, I mean, it's just so emotional. Definitely from both from the father and mother is probably equally devastating. But the father learning from it after the fact and then wanting to go down there and pay his last respects. So they get down there, they get in the morgue, and as you know, it's cold. A morgue is cold. That's the point of a morgue, right? To keep the bodies fresh, or at least not smelling, and kind of stopping the body from decaying,
decomposing, right?
So they come up to this very tiny body bag. And recall, John, what I told you earlier, this was a black couple, right? The nurse or doctor, whoever was, with the father, open up the bag, and there's a white kid in there, a white dead baby. Not his kid.
You got to be kidding me.
Not his kid. So, and John, seeing any kid, especially a baby, is very disturbing.
Yeah.
Whether it's your kid, whether you know the person, whether it's just a picture you find on the internet.
It's horrible.
You don't want to see a dead baby, right? So that's not his kid. The nurse hurries up, holy crap, shuts the bag, and they go to the next body bag, okay? They open up the body bag, and it is his kid, okay? But the chest is moving.
You got to be kidding me.
The chest is moving. The child is breathing.
And alive?
Alive and breathing.
So they took this family's child who was alive, put it in a body bag, and put it down in the morgue. Dude, if this dad hadn't gone down there to say his last goodbye to this kid would have been what? Just
the kid would have probably suffocated and and died. He's in a morgue, right? It's cold.
That's
right
insane.
In a body bag. He was pronounced dead around 2.5 hours prior.
I would never want to go to these doctors. How they can't even. Not only did they not deliver the baby, they put a live baby in the morgue.
Right.
I mean,
shocking.
It's insane.
The child. So of course, as you could imagine, the nurse whoa, emergency. let's go. Let's get this baby out of there. Let's start working on the baby. And amazingly, the baby survived, John. Now the baby has significant injuries,
Sure.
and significant brain injuries from the trauma that happened during birth, and maybe and likely from sitting in a morgue for a couple
Yeah,
hours.
no kidding. Wow, that is insane. I mean, that is like a worse nightmare. That sounds a lot like the case that was in the news recently from Jeffrey Feiger's office. I don't know if you saw this, but they pronounced this lady dead, put her in a body bag, shipped her to the morgue, and then she was still breathing
Wow.
and still alive. And I mean, that's like a worst nightmare type situation, like, waking up in a body bag or, being buried alive or something. But this is real life, man. I cannot believe that is a wild story. When you first told me about that, I was like, I can't believe that something like this could happen.
It's unbelievable, John.
It's we've had cases like this, not just like this, but like the most unbelievable type cases that you're just like, there is no, like, you couldn't make this stuff up, right? There's I remember when I was young, we had a case when I was at Feiger's office where there was a funeral, and so they were burying this guy, and the whole family's there. And you know how the hearse pulls up, and they have to like get the pallbearers have to like, take the coffin out of the trunk. Well, the pallbearers are like loading, and it's like the guy's brother, right? He's burying his brother, and they're all pulling the coffin out of the hearse, and they needed the hearse guy to like move the car up a little bit so they could like slide it out. The dude put it in reverse, the hearse driver, by accident, and reversed and pinned the guy's brother, crushing his legs and killing him.
Oh my God.
At the funeral in front of all these people who are there to mourn the death of the other brother. I mean, you're like, dude, like,
Did he live?
no.
Oh.
And he was crushed. It crushed him. And so he was still able to move around and like speak. And he's like, help. And then when they pulled the car off,
How did the funeral continue?
No.
No?
I don't know like exactly how it went down that day, but I mean, it was like, it was a tragic day for everybody,
Sure.
But these are crazy things. It's like on like what's the worst thing that could ever go happen on your birth or your death? And it's like, I think we've covered it.
Sure, absolutely.
And these things, I understand, Mickey, do happen. I mean, there was we had cases with remember those funeral homes in Detroit? They were stuffing people's dead bodies up in the attic and stuff.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And they were like finding these people couldn't bury their loved ones, or their bodies will be misplaced. It's crazy, It's like, don't you think they would have a better tracking system for, these people's dead bodies or something?
You need to respect the dead, right? They deserve some respect at the end, and it's shocking seeing some of the treatment that these funeral homes give. I mean, you just talked about that one case.
Yeah,
there's examples of that all across the country.
Yeah. It's really sad, and it's like very traumatic, I think, for people. We have a case right now where involves a graveyard where this mom would take her daughter every Mother's Day to grandma's grave, and they would take pictures together. And the cemetery company did not properly cement the headstone.
Okay.
So they're with this like 2-year-old little girl taking pictures at the grave, and the headstone collapses on top of this little girl at the cemetery and crushes her head under the gravestone while they're there to, mourn their grandma.
Oh no.
I mean, it's crazy. You'd never think that like, a cemetery would be a place of danger like that, but
absolutely. It's even more, those of course are crazy stories, but in what I do in the medical field, it's even more kind of shocking because these doctors are supposed to be, smart, cream of the crop,
Yeah.
right? And you really rely on their expertise when you're in trouble and you go to the hospital.
Sure.
So some of these, no other way of putting it, but, boneheaded mistakes that I know you've seen it. You've
Yeah.
tried some medical malpractice cases before.
Yeah.
And I see them all the time, or too much, or too frequently. One example is there's a case that came across my table where the doctor operated on the wrong foot. Okay?
And so how does this happen?
It shouldn't happen,
I mean,
right?
don't they have left and right? I mean, isn't this shouldn't there be marked appropriately?
There's so many procedures, in place to prevent this from happening, where you think, how does this happen anymore? I don't know if you had any major surgeries. I know I haven't, but I've, seen cases involving them.
Yeah.
Many surgeries, if you look, so if it's getting done on your foot or your arm, you're marked up.
Yeah, I had my shoulder
Yeah.
done. And before you did it, the doctor takes a marker, puts it on your shoulder and says, we're operating on this today. I'm like, yeah, doc, of course. But I guess there's a good reason that they do that.
Yeah, there is. They mark it up so they know where they're making the incisions, right? And then there are timeouts that take place during surgery. All right, these timeouts are standard of care, okay, that any surgeon or procedure does. And what they do is for the safety of the patient, okay? So think about the case I just told you about, right? There should be a timeout at the start of the procedure with a very basic question, everybody. Are we operating on the right foot? Right? So they look at their charts. They look at, they confirm with the nurses and the techs and the staff and the anesthesiologist in there, and everyone's in agreement. We're operating on the right foot, right? So there should be a timeout where something like this would be caught. But
Yeah,
here
because
it's
you
not
got a
caught.
whole team in there, people, right?
Yeah.
Like highly trained, highly paid, highly educated people that someone should say, it's the wrong foot, man.
Yeah, you think it'd be simple, right? I mean, I was shocked when I saw this come across.
Yeah.
And of course, it was a fusion that was done. So after the surgery, the patient's no longer able to move their big toe. All right.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, the big toe is very important to walking. Right.
Right,
I mean,
right.
It's probably the most important toe. All right. If you need a toe you could lose, like make it your pinky toe
pinky
or something.
toe, yeah.
Right? Not your big toe, or it's referred to as a great toe.
The great toe. I didn't know that. The great toe.
The great toe. So she got a fusion on the wrong foot, right? So she
my
still
God.
needs the fusion on the other foot. So what does the doctor say? I'm sorry, I'll do your other foot for free.
Dude, okay, I gotta tell you, this is like these doctors. I wonder if it's the same doctor on the story I'm about to tell you. So, and look, I don't want to rag on doctors, but there's bad doctors just like there's bad lawyers, right? You don't just because you've got your medical degree or your law license or anything else. There's still a lot of bad apples in the profession out there and anything, but. I have a case that's just like that right now. This lady, she's about 40 years old. She goes to see a very well-known Detroit metropolitan plastic surgeon who will remain unnamed. The case is currently pending right now in Oakland County.
Yeah.
And she's a mom, right? And she had her breasts were a little off from breastfeeding and stuff. So she had one breast that was larger than the other breast, right? And because she had been given birth and breastfeeding, they were sagging more than they had when she was younger, right? Aging, right? So she said, I want my breasts, it's time. I'd like my breasts to be even and maybe, lifted, right? So they don't sag as much. So no problem. It should have been like, okay, we're going to put this implant in here, this implant in here. They're going to be even. They're going to look good. Great, whatever. Okay. Supposed to be like, no problem. So she goes in, she gets fitted, she does the thing, they do the surgery. She comes out, and, she's bandaged up. And when she takes the bandages off in the mirror, her bigger breast is now ginormous and completely lopsided.
Wow.
And she goes, oh my God, no. She goes to the doctor. She says, I think you guys put the wrong implants in. They put the big implant in the big breast and the small implant in the small breast. So now it looks completely off kilter, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, no, you're just overreacting. You got to let the swelling go down. So she waits, swelling goes down, completely wrong. The doctor's like, yep, we screwed up. we put the wrong implant in the wrong side, which it's like, dude, you were in there working on the breast. Why don't you just look at the big breast and put in the right implant? But that is
It should be easy.
Like, what is so hard about this? But you know what he said? Just like that story that you told me, he said, all right, I'll do it for free. No, like, it's like, oh, just not a big deal. Like, yeah, you have to go in for another surgery. And then he compared it to a steak at a fine dining restaurant. He goes, you know, it's like my place is like a fine dining establishment. If sometimes you order the steak and the chef cooks it just right, but you know, you send it back because you're not happy.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. It's like, no, dude, you ordered the steak, you gave the seafood.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. You did it completely wrong.
Yeah. But it's crazy that you know, that those errors can happen that are so simple.
Yeah. I've got, you know, another story, you know, speaking of plastic surgery, that we're talking about it happened a few decades ago. It was another attorney at my firm that had it.
Yeah.
He's actually, I believe he's off counselor. He might even, actually, he's just renting space out, okay, at my office. He had a plastic surgery case where this lady was supposed to get a boob job, okay, goes in, and she wakes up. She didn't get a boob job.
No.
The doctor did a nose job on her.
Oh, my gosh.
Did the wrong procedure. All right. Let's get even more shocking, okay, is that this case goes all the way to trial. And there was a verdict, okay, and the jury did give money, but it's not what you thought. It was very small.
Yeah.
Right? And after speaking to the jurors, what they said, John, was, she looks better with a new nose.
That's crazy. But you know, there's I think a lesson there. Plastic surgery cases. First of all, I think medical malpractice cases are very difficult in general. I mean, would you agree? Like, people want to trust their doctors. People don't want to believe that a doctor would create would. I think people are more forgiving to doctors as they would be compared to like a truck driver who hits somebody or something.
Absolutely. And you know what I think makes medical malpractice cases usually incredibly difficult is that, as in every case, you got to prove every element, right?
Yeah.
We got to prove first that they breach a standard of care and that it caused the injury and damages, right? Now, in an auto case, for example, sometimes the liability can be clear. The truck ran a red light
Right.
and T-boned, you know, your client. And at that point, when you go to trial, really what you're talking about is injuries and damages that are related, right? For medical malpractice at trial, we first need to convince a jury that this doctor, as you already stated, who people want to trust, right, screwed up. So we got to get past that hurdle first. And then there's another issue where usually people are at the doctors because they have something wrong with them.
Right.
So the issue ends up being, well, did that injury get caused by the doctor's negligence, or would this have happened either way? And that comes up very prominently in like stroke cases.
Yeah,
right?
those are tough cases.
They're tough cases, right? Because even if you can prove a breach of standard of care, you still need to show that the patient, your client, would have had a better outcome.
Which
right?
is hard.
Which is hard. And there's certain treatment available, TPA, mechanical thrombectomy, that needs to be given during a certain time period to be effective, right? But nevertheless, at the end of the day, the client still suffered a stroke, right? So we have to get over those hurdles that you don't see in the everyday, sometimes auto cases or more. Not that those cases are simpler; they're just different, right? There's a different complexity to the medical malpractice.
For sure. And I think with plastic surgery cases, jurors are more reluctant to give a damage verdict because, number one, the procedure is usually elective, right? Like, the person made a decision to get surgery that it wasn't like to remove a cancerous tumor or something, you know, for aesthetics, you know. And I think that they just look a little more skeptically on plaintiffs in those cases when awarding damages. You know, I find that case that I told you with the breast mix up.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the defense is, well, what's the big deal? You know, but I think it is a big deal. I mean, she agreed to have surgery one time to have these things that were bothering her about her own body. And the doctor was so arrogant. Not only did he screw up, he was arrogant about it. And then, now he's forcing her to undergo additional procedures, has to go to, go see a new doctor because now she doesn't trust the doctor.
Sure.
So let me ask you, so from a medical, like not from a legal perspective, but just like seeing this and being every day in cases about doctors making mistakes, like when you go to your own doctor, like how do you find a doctor, and like how do we make sure that our doctors aren't these doctors that are operating on the wrong foot?
That's tough. I am a little bit more careful when I go to doctors. Okay. And I will premise this on the majority of doctors are good.
Yeah.
All right. And in fact, what I'll say, the majority of cases that I even have, the doctors are good and just made a mistake.
Sure.
All right. And they should pay for it, right? My client should be compensated for it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not qualified to be a doctor, and they don't mean to,
right.
They're not doing this on purpose.
Right.
Now, there are cases where doctors do some pretty disturbing stuff. In the news, of course, you heard of the cancer cases.
Yeah,
right?
False diagnosis so
right.
they can get that insurance money and stuff.
The Anderson cases, right?
Yeah, I worked on
sexual
those.
assault. I mean, my firm as well has worked on those. Those are shocking, and those are more rare. So when I go to the doctors, there is one thing I do, and it depends what you go for, okay? But if you're going to go see an orthopedic surgeon, right, something that, it's not an emergency. Because if it's an emergency, John, go to the closest ER, all right? Yeah. But if this is elective or it's a surgery that could be pushed off a little bit, do your research. Google's there. There's a lot of reviews, okay? You can look up licensing online. Call a friend. Use Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, do you have recommendations for an orthopedic surgeon? That's usually the best route people take, and that I take personally. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
But I definitely, when I'm at the hospital, I'm doing a little bit more watching.
We become more skeptical, right? Like, at least for me, before I got into this field, I would kind of take whatever my doctor said as gospel. Now I trust, what did they say? Trust, but verify, right? And one thing that I think is important is getting a second opinion. So I had, my right shoulder's bad. All my shoulders are bad. I don't know why, but my right shoulder's bad. I have a tear in it. So I went to one doctor. He said, we need to do this operation immediately, and we're going to do this full-blown open operation. I said, well, let me go see a second doctor. Tells me, well, we're going to do a different type of surgery. I go to the Mayo Clinic. They tell me you don't need surgery at all. So I got 3 different opinions from 3 different well-respected, qualified doctors. Is which one's right, which one's wrong? Maybe they're all right. I don't know. But I think, you get opinions so you can make an educated, informed decision. And hopefully we never are in a situation like we've been talking about today where, if you're going to give birth, you can't really choose, right?
Well, you can, right? To the extent that you're giving, first you start out with the OB, right?
Sure.
That's tracking and monitoring the baby's and the mother's progress. And usually, if it's not that OB, it's somebody else at their practice that gets called in to do the delivery. So usually you do have some choice, and that is something you should really, read up on, is your OB, 100%. But, of course, there's emergency situations where, people or doctors aren't available, or maybe, you are only 30 weeks in and you're up north in Traverse City and, oh, crap, the baby needs to come out early. You're not traveling all the way back down here. You're having a doctor up north, do the delivery.
Do you find that there's less quality medical care, at least from our perspective, in some of these like more rural hospitals as compared to more like Detroit Metro, Grand Rapids Metro, et cetera?
That's a fact, John. Okay. There is a huge issue with disparity of medical care, both in the rural areas. I have a lot of cases in the Thumb, in mid-Michigan, northern Michigan, where we as a firm see the same doctors kind of over and over again. And there's actually, depending on where the doctors go and work, there's actually stipends given from hospitals, from communities to try to attract good doctors to these areas where typically, a doctor would rather practice in Ann Arbor, or in Detroit, as opposed going to, I don't know, some city up in northern Michigan with a population of 2,000 people.
Right.
Right. There is a big disparity. And John, there's also a big disparity that you're probably, with your line of work, that you're probably well aware of. There's a racial disparity of medical care.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that poor people, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, minorities like, African Americans and other minorities receive worse medical care. And in fact, I just tried a case in front of Dave Allen in Wayne County, where I had a poor inner city African American guy who got horrible care, not just from one doctor, but from across all the medical spectrums. And I asked myself, like, how could this happen? In this case, a guy got shot like 8 times. They rushed him to the hospital, and they left gauze inside the wounds in his legs. And then his legs literally grew over the gauze, and he had a piece of gauze sticking out that you could see. And he didn't know. He thought it was part of his wound.
Right.
And the doctors saw it and didn't take it out and didn't help him. They didn't even sit him down and say, hey, man, you have a piece of gauze stuck in your leg that needs to come out. And we got a verdict, $3.1 million on this case. And it was the right decision. But even the defense expert in this case, a guy from Detroit, we talked about the healthcare outcomes for minorities, poor people who don't have any other options, and how this is an example of that. Like, one of these doctors along the way couldn't say, like, hey, you have a piece of gauze stuck in your leg. I can see it. Let's take it out.
You think it'd be easy enough, right?
Easy enough. And one other thing, Mickey, what's up with insurance for these doctors? I see so many cases where these doctors have like only $200,000 of insurance. And that's not a lot of insurance, man. Like, if you see like trucking companies, for example, have to have at least $1 million. Right. They usually have more. Any company that does business normally has at least $1 million of insurance, at least. How is it that doctors are only carrying $200,000 of insurance when they're operating on people and their lives are in their hands? How is this allowed? And
yeah, I mean, we run into that issue far too often, and it's terrible. There are other states that actually require minimal amount of insurance, malpractice insurance coverage for doctors. Michigan doesn't have that. We're hoping that changes, and that should change maybe in the future with our current legislature how it is right now.
Yeah.
There's a chance that might change, and I hope it does, because, for example, our firm won a trial a few months back where an OB, all right, this was a shoulder dystocia case, all right, so it's when the child gets stuck in the birthing canal.
Yeah.
All right. And there's a manipulation that is used to get the child out safely. Okay. But if you pull too hard or if you do it wrong, you start ripping the nerves on the back of your neck going down your shoulder. Okay. Well, this OB who's doing deliveries, right, who worst case scenario could get hit for millions of dollars.
Yeah. If they give a kid with cerebral palsy or something, those are those
$100,000 coverage. That's all she had.
How is this possible?
It's unbelievable. And I don't know how they sleep at night, John. I know that you have coverage. We hope we never need it. Malpractice.
I got more coverage. I got 10 times
coverage.
as much coverage as these doctors in case somebody slips and falls at my house on a puddle or something.
Exactly. So I don't know how they sleep at night because they're also collectible, right? So if a doctor, right, for example, a neurosurgeon, okay, who only has a $200K policy, well, if they get hit with a multi-million-dollar verdict,
they got to pay.
And they're collectible.
So why don't these doctors should want higher coverage limits for themselves. I mean, the perfect example is this case I just told you with the gauze. The doctor who was responsible and who the jury found responsible only had a total of $400,000 in coverage. And then all I heard was complaints he decided to take it to trial. He put everything on the line. We wanted to settle with them. We would have settled very reasonably, given the facts of the case. They said no. Zero offer. They said go pound sand.
Wow.
Okay, you make that decision and a jury decides that you were wrong and you caused injury, then you got to pay the piper, right? Litigation is all about risk management. And all I heard was, we only have $400,000 of coverage. Well, woe is me. I'm going to have to close my clinics and stuff, which I think was BS. But beside the point, that's not my client's responsibility or problem that you made bad risk management decisions and that you don't have more insurance when you're performing this medical care on people. I think that you're right. I think we should have minimum coverage. And I think the doctors should want more coverage to protect themselves, just like I have coverage to protect myself from, and if anything, God forbid, happens or I make a mistake, because we're not perfect, but we have to pay for our mistakes. So,
or one of your associates or somebody that works with, it might not even be you, right? It might not be me. It might be just somebody that works. It might be a file clerk. Right?
Yeah.
But you should be protected. You should be covered. And definitely in the setting of medical care, which that's public health, right? That there's an interest by the government, okay, for their people, us, to be healthy and to get good medical care, right? And we should be covered if there is an accident that happens, because if not, John, who does it fall on, right? Let's say that, and this goes for auto cases too, right? If you have a catastrophic injury and you don't have enough coverage, or in medical malpractice, let's say you have a catastrophic injury and the doctor only has $100K, but you need a lifetime of care. Well, who ends up paying?
Somebody's got to pay.
Medicaid. Well, who pays? We do.
Everybody's got to pay. It's got to fall somewhere, right? Somebody's always got to pay. And so where are we going to place it? So that's very interesting. We could talk about the pitfalls and the problems of the system for a long time, but good work, and keep it, one case at a time, keeping them honest, Mickey. And thank you for being here today. I think that this is the craziest case, I think, maybe perhaps so far on the podcast. So thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, of course.
It was awesome having you here, and I look forward to working with you soon, buddy.
We'll do it again.
That brings us to the conclusion of another podcast of Cases Gone Wild, brought to you by Marco Law. Thank you for attending. We appreciate it and appreciate being able to talk about these issues with you. If you or someone you know needs an attorney, don't hesitate to contact my office, marcolaw.com, M-A-R-K-O law.com, or call us 313-777-7LAW. Until next time on Cases Gone Wild.